Welcome to Replenish, hope that sustains in the midst of adversity. This is a safe place where I invite special guests to share their insight and encouragement to replenish us on the journey of raising kids from hard places. So whether you're foster, adoptive, kinship, or a safe family, this conversation is for you. And I just want to remind you the chat room is open. So, or it's not a room, sorry, but the chat thing's open. So feel free to chat away, say hi to each other, ask some questions, answer each other's questions. This is all about you. So feel free to do that. And today I have invited Rachel Robert on the show to talk to us and have a conversation about biological siblings and their perspective on the whole foster adoption thing. So hi, Rachel.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming on. So before we get started, I'm just going to tell everybody some of the things that make you so amazing. We know that there's many, many more, but here's a few. So Rachel Robert earned a doctorate in clinical psychology, focusing her research and clinical practice on the mental and behavioral health of children. With over a decade of experience working with children from hard places, she specializes in supporting children and families who have experienced trauma and disrupted attachments. Her passion is for coming alongside foster and adoptive families is both personal and professional. Personally, she understands the unique joys and challenges of adopted children, adoptive families, and biological children of the adopted families, as 3 of her siblings were also adopted. Professionally, her dissertation research examined trauma, attachment, and neurobiological factors in adopted children. She currently provides trauma-informed and attachment-based parenting interventions to foster families throughout the LA County Department of Mental Health, supporting children with co-occurring medical and psychological conditions at Miller Children's and Women's Hospital in Long Beach, and providing brief trauma intervention and consultation to international missionary children and families. Rachel is pursuing advanced training in pediatric psychology as postdoctoral fellow at Chalks Children's Hospital to better support children with families in distress. Rachel is a follower of Jesus, resides in Whittier, California, and is married to an amazing man named Jeff. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Kind of obnoxious.
No, we're so glad to have you. It's all good stuff. It just shows us, that not only were you raised in a family with 3 adopted kiddos, but you have made this your life's calling. So I think that's pretty amazing when you hear about somebody who is raised in that kind of family and then they're turning around and saying, hey, I want to continue this as a lifestyle. That says a lot about, I think, how things went. And, you're just the fact that you're doing that is hope, I think, to all of us.
Yeah, so I think like all of you, adoption has touched my life on a personal level, as you mentioned. But rather than being the adoptive or foster parent, like most of you all, I was one of the 4 biological children when my family adopted 3 more, my brother and 2 sisters. So I get those joys and I get those challenges, and I really enjoy connecting with foster and adoptive families, both personally and professionally.
Awesome. So tell us what started you on this journey of working with kids from hard places.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Growing up in a family with children from hard places, it was kind of forced into it as a child of an adoptive family. But it became really personal to me when I saw the transformation and the growth and the healing that can happen in relationship and in families. And so I became passionate about doing that professionally and coming alongside families and helping them through those joys and challenges.
That's so cool. I just think that's so neat. We're so blessed to have you and just hear from someone who actually lived it, but in a side, because so many of us are concerned who have biological children. There's a whole dynamic, and so much of what we do in helping our kids is we're focused so much on our kids who have been adopted or in the foster care that we worry about our biological ones. And so having you here to just help us gain some insight into that whole world is from your own personal experience as well as your education is wonderful. So thanks again.
Oh yeah, and I'm happy to share both my experience as well as some of the experience of individuals who are in a similar situation where they're biological children in adoptive families. When I did some of my preliminary research for my dissertation, I actually interviewed some children who are bio children, or I'll say pre-existing children, because sometimes there's children in the home that have been in the home for quite some time, and then you add to your family. But those children who have been in the home for a long time may or may not actually be biological, but they've been pre-existing for a long time. And so I'll kind of make that, I'm grouping it all into one category, but I realize that sometimes bio children could also include children who've been in the home for a while.
Yeah, well, that's good. It's always good to include people because you never know who's on the call, and it's always helpful. That's why in the beginning I list a long list of us. You know, it's usually we're all lumped into foster adopt, but really we have, you know, kinship and safe families and different dynamics. You know,
that's right. Yeah, and I'll also just add to as we get started that I don't typically differentiate between biological children and adoptive children and families. Like once your family, they're your children no matter how they came into your life. But like for today's purposes in this conversation, I will be, you know, specifically saying like biological child or bio child, just to make it clear which perspective I'm taking. But I don't typically differentiate in that way.
Yeah, I hear that. I think I differentiate the most in these type of talks, you know, with my other fellow foster and adoptive parents, just because that clarification needs to happen to understand, because we're talking about behaviors usually and stuff. So anyway, so I get that. I appreciate that. So why don't we start by just talking about the impact that adoption or fostering had on you, and we can expand on that.
Absolutely. I mean, so I don't need to be the first to tell you that for most families, adoption disrupts the family system, or foster care disrupts the family system. And typically after the placement has been finalized, the family unit is in crisis. And I think each family member can take on a different experience, and there can just be profound relational or emotional, psychological stress and loss. And each member of the family is adjusting to new roles, to new norms and new dynamics. So, I mean, I want to start first with foster and adoptive parents. I mean, you all might be experiencing increased stress, particularly at the beginning when you're attempting to attach to your adopted or foster child while maintaining relationships with any pre-existing children in the home. And even as the adoptive parent or foster parent like enters into the adopted or foster child's trauma, that parent might also experience like secondary post-traumatic stress responses, which can transfer into the family system. That's what even the research shows. I have a great deal of empathy for foster and adoptive parents. You're managing a lot. So it's traumatic for the parent. It's traumatic for the adopted or the foster child, and their response can vary really considerably as he or she grieves that separation from either a biological parent or a previous caregiver, and they're often adjusting to a new home, new family, community, friends, school, possibly even culture or language, depending on where the child's origins come from. So there's a tremendous amount of grief and loss and trauma for the adopted and the foster child. And then finally, there's the biological child's perspective or any pre-existing children in the home, which I don't think most people take that perspective very often. And there's actually really limited research and resources for biological children of adoptive families. And they're largely kind of overlooked in the adoption triad. If we think about the triad being the parent, the adopted child, and the biological child, they're often kind of overlooked. And so it's really common for biological children to experience feelings of jealousy. There's a loss of parental attentiveness because you're overwhelmed. There's limited parental resources because, again, you're overwhelmed and stretched thin. And there can be anxiety for the child and as far as their role in the family and their future in the family system. There can even be like depression or anger in response to the parent's decision to adopt. And that whole process kind of like propels the family into a state of disequilibrium and kind of can wreak havoc on the family system. But I think it's also important to note that with any addition to a family, either you're adding children through biological means or you're adding children through foster adoption, like that has the potential to produce positive or negative outcomes. And I think the extent of like preparation and processing and resilient adaptation, like all of those things influence the degree to which like this disruption in the family is either challenging or devastating. So that's a little bit about the trauma of adoption and foster care. And I think we have to acknowledge the problem at hand first to know that there even is a problem at hand that we need to address, and how do we address that?
For sure. I think it is so important to address so much beforehand, you know, that we can, but I really think, at least I know this is true for me, and I've talked to several other, you know, my girlfriends who have adopted, that you don't fully understand how traumatic it's going to be, you know. Yeah. Kind of like you somewhat think, well, it's going to be different for me because I'm going to parent, I'm going to, I don't know, do things different, or it's not going to be as whatever. And then you get blown out of the water and you realize like, oh, this is so hard. So I think even though you prepare, like nothing can really prepare you for how hard it really is. And, you know, hopefully that's not the case for everybody, which I know it isn't. And I'm happy for those families that don't have those type of struggles. But for the families that, you know, that do have that struggle, that's, you know, those are the people who I have dear to my heart and want to help. Yeah. And so, so when we're in that, so, you know, we get home, bring home the kids, or however they come to us. The trauma starts happening, the behavior starts happening, you start living in crazy town. Parents are just trying to figure out, I think it, like for us, it caught us off guard, even though we were aware of everything. And so it takes a while for families to adjust and recognize and be mindful and not be so reactive like the parents.
Yeah.
But what does that look like for the bio kids? Like, how are they feeling and responding? And are they getting secondhand trauma? Like, what does that all look like? We have studied and talked a lot about the adoptive foster kid and their trauma and behaviors. But what about the siblings that were at home first?
I'm so glad that you asked about that. And I'll speak from what I know from both personal experience and from talking with some biological children of adoptive families, but I also know that each child has really their own unique experience. So this might not capture your biological child's experience, but here's some broad themes that I've seen, some feelings of like being overlooked or disregarded. So there's actually research that shows that the loss of parental attention was like the biggest thing when it came to adoption. It was the most significant. And so they just kind of feel overlooked. They like don't get their parents' attention as much as they used to. And some kids feel overlooked not only because they're getting less attention, but also they felt like their feelings about foster care or adoption were overlooked or disregarded. They had some reservations or hesitation, and parents just kept going forward, which I think it's also important to note that we don't, parents don't typically ask their children, what do you think about us having another baby? Like you don't sit down and ask your kids that, like you make that decision for yourself as an adult and as a parent. With foster and adoption, I think it is unique, and there's an opportunity to at least connect with your kids about it and get their sense of how they feel about it. And you still get to make your own decision as a parent, but at least you can address their fears and comfort their losses and things like that. So overlooked and disregarded is a big feeling that comes up a lot. Alone and isolated is another feeling. I've heard so many bio kids say, like, no one understands. No one understands what it's like to be in an adoptive or a foster family. I've seen, and I mean, I've experienced all of these at different points in my life, but anger is another feeling that comes up a lot, kind of similar to that disregarded. Some kids feel like, were my feelings even considered? Do I even have a voice here? So again, some kids have apprehension about adoption, and sometimes it's not even verbally expressed, but it kind of comes out behaviorally as anger. Also, another feeling that comes up a lot is jealousy. So I think similar to if you were to bring another child into your home through biological means, other children are going to feel a little bit of jealousy. They're going to feel like their attachment with the parent is threatened. They're obviously getting less time and attention. I also see depression come up a lot. One girl I interviewed, she just said that she was constantly weepy after adoption, and there's so much grief and loss for bio kids, for all members of the adoption triad, but for bio kids, there is a lot of grief and loss that's not usually seen. I also see like fear come up a lot. There's lots of questions about logistics and roles and dynamics, and who am I going to share a room with? Is my spot at the dinner table going to be taken? There was one boy I was working with that he said he felt like he was performing for company, where he always kind of had to be on in his own home with these like seemingly strangers. I mean, I think that quickly resolved just as siblings interact, and it's
Right.
no longer that honeymoon phase, but feeling like they have to be on, or even like pressure to keep it all together. That comes up a lot too for bio kids, where they see that their parents are so overwhelmed, they're exhausted, they're totally preoccupied, and so they feel like they have to keep it all together and hold their stuff together. And I think interestingly too, there was one gal who I was working with where she felt like she had to keep it all together, and she felt like she couldn't get support for what she needed. She couldn't feel her feelings because she thought it was like unchristian. She felt like it was somehow like immoral to feel angry or jealous or any of these things against this beautiful thing that God designed, adoption. So just this pressure to keep it all together. And then lastly, I feel like there's some bio kids feel the pressure to co-parent. I think either consciously or unconsciously, they take the role of a co-parent, particularly if there's a great age difference between your bio kid and your adopted or foster children, or if there's a difference in cognitive ability or language development. I think that's especially when they take on a parent role. So I can relate to this. I mean, I was actually 15 when my family adopted my 5, 7, and 8-year-old siblings. And I was a freshman in high school sharing a room with a kindergartner and a second grader. And it was a lot. And I took on this role at times as kind of like a surrogate parent. And I felt incredibly frustrated when I saw my siblings be parented differently than I was parented. It felt very unfair. It felt like I would never be able to get away with watching that much TV, or I never would be able to do this or that. And so for me personally, it took a long time for me to like finally understand that every child is parented differently based off of their unique needs. And my parents helped me see that I had an opportunity to connect with my siblings rather than correct their siblings. Like I had the opportunity to be their sister. No one else gets to be their sister. So like I get to be their sister. But I think there is, especially when there's a big age difference, kind of that co-parenting role. And so some bio kids might feel like they either need to or they want to, consciously or unconsciously, that might come up. So those are some of the feelings.
Yeah, I would think even the fact that you're in the room, you can't help but have to correct, at times.
Exactly.
But I wonder if that's true for a lot of bio kids, because the parents are so stressed out. If there are a lot of behaviors, then I would think the bio kid would feel like, oh, I don't want to be the bad kid too. My parents are already stressed out. So I'm just going to try to be good and not voice my needs and the parents aren't hearing the subtlety of what their needs are. So rather than making them really known, in the way that, you know, kids do, that the,
Yeah.
you know, the misbehavior that we're seeing in the other kids are trying to make their needs known.
Yeah.
I would think that, and I'm thinking back, like just on my own parenting experience, that a lot of times I did rely on my
Mm-hmm.
bio son, who was 5 years older, to
Right.
help me out, because I would be so overwhelmed, and they would play games,
Mm-hmm.
and they would end up, you know, in fights all the time. And
Right.
you know, eventually, like you said, that I saw in my own family, my biological son, um, get like worn out from that, and eventually
Mm-hmm.
like quit trying. Like I could just see his
Yeah.
heart kind of closing and saying,
Mm.
this connecting is hard.
Yeah.
And I
It is.
think, and I wonder too, how many of us like encouraged our kids and saying that it was going to be hard, but not really knowing how hard it was going to be for them, just like we didn't know how hard for us. And maybe those kids
Yeah.
feel like lied to and like led
Yeah.
down, and can't then say it, and can't say, you guys lied to me, this sucks.
I see someone in the chat say they agreed, you know, so yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of very similar to that honeymoon phase. Newlyweds go through it. Maybe they didn't think that's how marriage would be, or parents to a newborn, like, I didn't think this is how it would be. And I think adoptive and foster families are like, you can have as much preparation as possible. And sometimes you still don't know what you're getting into, because people are unique, and you don't know how you're going to react with another person who's going to react on their own to other people who are in your home that are also reacting. And so those dynamics play out differently for each family.
Right. And I'm sure you saw it in your own family, your other biological siblings.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody probably had their own way of coping and reacting and responding, because
Yeah.
each relationship is different too, with each, you know, maybe some of the younger ones who are closer age, they all,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I
Yeah.
just think.
Well, I think that the trauma of adoption on like the family system really does often animate in a behavioral manner. So like all of my siblings, we all kind of reacted and behaved a little bit differently. And I think as parents, it's important to remember that all behavior has meaning, and that like your child is trying to tell you something with their behavior, which is true for foster adopted children as well as biological children. And so, yeah, I mean, I know for myself and for some of my siblings, and even other children that I've talked to, there's often like transitional challenges with those new roles and dynamics. There's difficulty forming new attachments with, like, you have to attach to like new sisters and new brothers, and that can be incredibly hard.
And you might not like them.
Yeah, it's true.
But you're stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Your
Trying
family.
to, yes, trying to figure out how to really even maybe accept and like them.
Right. Right. Yeah. I know in some families I've worked with, I've seen violence and competition and like territorial things happening. They're really just trying to cope. But there's, everything from like regulated tantrums to like destruction of property, and even like homicidal or suicidal thoughts. Like, I mean, I really have kind of seen the whole, or at least some of the spectrum. So yeah, and these types of behaviors really get in the way of forming those secure attachments and creating that new family system. And parents are often stressed out about it, and it can really negatively impact adoption and foster outcomes. And I mean, I've seen families that were placed and then they get pulled apart because of these types of behaviors.
Yeah, I love that you just remind us that all behavior is communication, and all of this that we think about that applies to our foster adoptive kid, it also applies to our biological kids. I just know sometimes they get, because their behavior sometimes isn't as extreme, it can get brushed under the rug. So what are some of the misses and mistakes and misunderstandings that parents make? Like, what are some of those? You grew up in it. I mean,
my parents didn't make any of these mistakes.
Oh no, they're perfect. I mean, the ones that were, if your parents were to make a mistake, what would it have been?
I tease. My mom often says that there's no perfect parent, only growing parents. So they own their mistakes too. But
And I
so
love that. I use it every time at the end of my show. It's my favorite quote.
Yeah. So I think the first myth that some parents make is that they don't see that their biological children are in crisis and like desperately need attention too. And so that has come up time and time again when talking to bio kids. The number one thing that comes up is loss of parental attention and affection. And one adolescent girl I was working with, she experienced her parents as so preoccupied with her adopted sister that she felt like she lost her parents. And I think it's really common, again, we talked about this, to kind of like see parents stressed out and feeling like kids need to hold their stuff in or hold it together because they feel like their parents don't have the space or the capacity. So I think the number one thing that parents miss is that their bio kids are hurting and struggling to adjust, or they just feel alone. No one gets it. And so they need like your eyes and your ears, your hearts, your hugs. One teenage boy said that he just needs to be held, which I love that. I mean, teenage boy would admit that, you know. So I think the first myth is parental attention. I think the second one is that sometimes parents don't see or honor their biological children's grief or loss. So bio kids like often give up a great deal for their adopted siblings who also lost a great deal. And I think parents want their bio kids to have like empathy for their new siblings' experience. And so I think they mistakenly emphasize the adopted child's pain and minimize the biological child's pain. So I think in theory, like understanding adoption from the adoptee's perspective, like could help the bio kid understand and like gain insight and empathy. But I think this approach minimizes the biological child's grief and loss. So I come from a belief that you can't give what you haven't received. And so I don't think bio kids can show empathy for their adopted siblings' trauma and grief and loss until they've experienced empathy for their loss as well. And
that's excellent, because I say that like as a parent, like in regards to, you know, you can't take your kid where you haven't gone, so you can't help them with their grief if you haven't grieved yourself. But like, I don't know, I've never thought about that, like with what you're saying. Like, of course, you know, our bio kids can't give away what we're not giving them. So I love that you brought up that point. It's seems so obvious, but I guess for me it wasn't. And I just love that you share that. So sorry to interrupt you. I just thought, oh my gosh, that's an awesome point.
And that really comes from my personal experience. That was something that I learned for myself. You know, so my mom would be like, don't you know what they've experienced, what they've gone through? And I'm like, don't you know what I've experienced, what I've gone through? So, so really once I was able to receive some empathy for my own losses and grief that came with it, then I was able to give that away to my siblings.
Yeah. And how did you help your mom and dad see that? Because for one, you're older, so you have more words and you have more, you know, we know teenagers are becoming their own people. And so they can challenge, you know, the parents' thoughts and whatever a lot easier. But how did that work for you? How were you able to do that? And then also, how would that look for helping our younger kids who may not recognize that there is some grief and loss in their lives because they don't even have that language, so they don't even know that's what's happening?
Right. You know, it's a great question, because I'm even trying to think back to that time, and I'm sure, I feel like we kind of evolved together, my parents and I, like having these conversations, and clearly, you know, there were some hard coins, and I think, I don't even, my parents are brilliant, they really are, so I think they had more insight than I did, but I don't even know how all of that came to be. But it was kind of this aha moment of like, oh, like no wonder I'm struggling so much. But as far as like as a parent giving that to your child, especially a child that's younger, you can name it for them. You can say, wow, you lost a lot. You've given up a lot, you know, and oh man, this must have been hard for you. Or even years later, and I'll share more on that in a moment too, on some tools to help you all. But naming a child's grief for them, even if they're not able to name it for themselves.
I love it. Okay, so what are some other?
So I'll just say one more thing, and we'll keep moving on. But
this is great.
I think the third and final thing that some parents miss is that they didn't check in with their child prior to adoption or foster care, or they don't continue to check in with them and process with their children even long after the placement was finalized. And kind of going back to my initial research, I was asking these kids what they wish they could have told their parents when they were considering adoption. And it came up again and again. It's like to check in with your kids prior, during, and after. One boy said that he really wished his parents would have taken the time to like individually and privately seek his input on adoption before setting things in motion. So again, you don't decide, like children don't decide if you have more children into your family, but to at least seek his, his thoughts and to address his fears. So if you can check in with your kids prior and give them a chance to be angry or overwhelmed by the idea and help them through that, and then continue to check in with them after. One girl said that she like wished her parents would have acknowledged that her family would never be the same again and help her grieve that. And it was only by checking in with her long after the adoption of her sister that she could have that comforted and healed. So it's not too late to check in with your kids.
I love that it's not too late. I mean, it's so important. We talk about our adoptive kids as needing to heal these past wounds. So I love that you are sharing with us that it's never too late to check in with our kids, even if they're adult kids. We can still go back and have that conversation and comfort them in those wounds and help heal those wounds, even if we didn't do it initially, that they're still there and we can still have those conversations. I think that's, just a really, I want to say sweet, but maybe that's too light of a word. But yeah, we really still can acknowledge those things. Yeah. So, so what are some of the tools? So we're talking about, these 3 common mistakes and mishaps. So let's maybe go through them and talk about, all right, so what's the tools and hope and
so I think you all know this just from your own either foster adopted children, but like give your child voice, and that doesn't just apply to the foster adopted children, but also to pre-existing children in your home. So help them like feel their feelings, feel their grief, their fears, help them name those experiences, and encourage them to like feel the feelings. So I think even some practical ways to do this is at the dinner table, name 3 feelings at the end of the day. So instead of how was your day, fine, it's like that they have to pick 3 feeling words. Or even growing up in my house, in the center of our kitchen table was a fruit bowl that did not have fruit in it. It actually had little emoji balls that you can buy on Amazon. And they had all these different faces on them. And my parents would have us find the one that looked most like our feelings for that day or that moment and pull it out and we talk about it. We usually ended up just pegging each other with the balls at the end of the dinner table, so it turned into something very playful amongst my siblings. But or even keeping a feeling words list on your fridge, so that vocabulary just becomes a part of your normal conversation. And I think even with adolescents, something that I encourage parents to do with the teenagers that I work with is, as a parent, go tell your teen like, hey, send me a song of how you're feeling, because I think music is so powerful. So whatever gets at those emotions and those feelings. So reflect, validate, normalize the feeling, and give comfort. So the idea of kind of feeling and dealing. These are all things that we do, and you guys probably know with your foster and adopted kids, but it applies to your bio kids too.
Another tip, the emoji bowls. Our balls, a big bowl. We do. We have sticks with the emojis at home, and then the names are the words are on the sticks. But I
like that.
I like the bowl. Like that sounds like a lot of fun. And I could see you could get into some trouble with those too.
It was all in good fun.
Yeah,
you gotta play. Play is the work of a child, so you gotta play. So I think another tip and tool for your family is to focus on your family. So really prioritize family time, family bonding. I think particularly if you're like just adjusting and attaching in foster care or foster or adoption, like limit that outside contact, stay home. Those are things that are very easy to do right now in the midst of COVID-19, but to really focus on your family and engage in activities that foster dependence on one another or encourage play or adventure. So like if you can get out and go camping because it's just you against the world, and your family really has to come together to depend on each other. There's another thing for you. And another one is, I think, don't go it alone. I think your family and especially your biological children need social support. And so if you as a parent, if you're feeling you're at like max capacity, you've reached your limit, I encourage you to reach out to a trusted friend or a family member to really lean into your child's life. Bio kids have said that it helps so much connecting with other people, mentors, Bible study leaders, coaches, and it also helps so much to reach out, like if bio kids have other bio kids, other adoptive families that they can lean on, where they feel like they understand what they're going through. So make sure you have that social support. Don't go it alone.
I love that. How do you, so just, in talking about the social support for our kids, I love what you're saying about helping identify other people in the community and allowing them to speak into our kids' lives, especially if we're feeling like we have a limited amount of energy to do that as we would have before, but allowing some other people in there. But then how do you have bio kids and siblings actually be able to connect on that level? Sometimes kids don't really want to open up to each other, even though they both could relate on stuff. So how do you foster that? I mean, I think like I think we're all in these families with other foster adoptive kids, and we do try to get the kids to interact and stuff, but I don't know, I guess I've never thought about trying to encourage the bio siblings.
Yeah, I think like with any relationship, like it just takes time to build trust where you really want to show all your cards and show your deep wounds. And I don't think you need to have 20 best friends, or 20 different family, So like even growing up, like I had one other girl that was about my age who adopted around the same time my family did. And we were just like this, where we were really relying on one another. It's just the two of us, like I knew some other bio kids of adoptive families, but really it was just that one good friend. And we kind of held each other through that time. So I don't think you don't need to have it's more about quality over quantity, but I think it takes time to build that trust. Where kids feel like they can open up. Yeah. Just a couple more tools for families. I think there's something so powerful when parents ask their children for forgiveness. So you might even consider sitting down with your bio child and let them know what you've heard today and ask them about their experience. And if there were misses or misunderstandings or mistakes that happened, like ask for forgiveness. I'm sorry that we didn't take your feelings into account. I wonder if you felt disregarded, or, I'm sorry I wasn't available for you during that hard time. There's something so restorative and reparative about that. And even in my adult life, I have had conversations like that with my parents that have been incredibly healing. So I think that's really powerful if there's opportunity for that.
Yeah, I like that. And I like when what you said is, I wonder if you felt disregarded, and helping, I think sometimes helping both my kids, giving them feelings, they don't, just helping with that emotional awareness, like maybe you felt this. So I love that idea of helping them identify maybe an emotion that might be attached to that they wouldn't otherwise bring to their consciousness or want to go there, and
absolutely.
So I like that, helping them name it,
Yep, absolutely. And then just another thing that we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like checking in. I think it's really important to check in with our kids, even after it's been years and years and years since you've adopted. And I kind of have this fun rule with some families that, not rule, but it's like suggestion for families that I encourage them is 1, 2, and 3. So I think once a day, you should check in with your child. It can be brief. Hey, how's it going? You know, I mean, it can be brief, but once a day, check in with your child. 2 times per month, like sit down and intentionally connect emotionally one-on-one. If you can do more than twice a month, awesome, but trying to be realistic here for the families that I work with. And then 3 times a year, plan a special one-on-one outing or date, and make that just a time for the 2 of you, or you and both parents if there's 2 parents in the home. So 1, 2, and 3, and you could adjust that as you need. I've seen some families do once a day, 2 times a week, 3 times a month. They like change it up, you know. So do what you can do, but once a day, 2 times per month, and 3 times per year, like really make you know, an important effort to check in, to connect, have some quality time.
I love it.
And then,
I love that 1, 2, 3. That I mean, it works for our spouses too, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody. That's kind of an easy, cool way to put it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then finally, when we talked about this, that holding time, I mean, I still think about how that adolescent boy told me that, like, the one thing he wishes he could tell his adoptive parents, or tell other adoptive parents, he was not adopted, tell his parents and other adoptive parents, is to hold your kids, even your teenagers. So, I mean, cradle them, rock them, cuddle, rub their shoulders, high five. Like, so many of our children are deprived of physical touch. And so, you know, give them some good eye contact and go hug your kids.
I love that. It reminds me of, you know, the How We Love stuff from the Yorkoviches. They talk about the importance of holding time, and how that healthy touch, and that it just is reminiscent of when we were babies, and how that physical nurturing is so soothing to us, and really helps regulate us and give us all those good chemicals in our bodies and brains that make us feel good.
Absolutely.
I love that you bring that up, you know, we to do that with our biological kids, holding time.
Yeah. And I think it's just important to know as we wrap up today that it's like, just because adoption is a trauma, it doesn't mean that it has to be traumatizing, and that your family can heal and your kids are resilient, and you know, you can be stronger than before, but it does take intentionality.
Yeah. Well, if there's anybody who wants to send a question Rachel's way, feel free to type it in the chat. We are open for Q&A time, but I appreciate you just sharing your hope with us today and giving us some of your insights.
Enjoy.
Yeah, I love it. So is there any special thing that you can think of that your parents maybe did to make you feel special, you know, when you have all those multiple kids that I don't know, I think people can resonate with. I know there's some larger families in here, you know. For me, one of the things I was able to do with our 2 kids is my adopted son would go to bed earlier, and my older son, once he went to bed, we would sneak off to Golden Spoon, and I'd say,
"Oh, that's great fun."
Spoon. And so we would do that several times during the week. And the funny thing is he actually works there now. It was his favorite spot. So that's one of the things that we would do, is we would sneak off after bedtime, because it was so hard to get away otherwise. And that would make him feel special.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of the 1, 2, 3 idea, I mean, it came from something similar to what my parents did with me, although I'll take credit for the cute little, you know, 1, 2, 3. I don't even know, it's not an acronym, it's not I don't know what you'd even call that, but yeah, I think similar to your son, I was older, and so I stayed up later, and I had some time to connect with my parents in the evening, and my mom and I still had like girls outings that were just us 2, like, you know, and it wasn't the younger girls, you know, so you know, trying to have some special one-on-one time. But I think it is in those little moments, like, that's why it's just like once a day, just a brief check-in. So even like picking up from school, or, you know, at the dinner table, if it's just the 2 of you, you know, prepping dinner, cleaning up dinner, or before bed or something like that. So it's just kind of, it's those little things and it's the bigger things that feel special.
Yeah. I know even my kids, they love when I like wink at them when no one's looking. Like they feel like that's so
Absolutely.
special that like that I winked at them like, hey, we
Yeah.
got like a little connection going. And
Yeah, you have a secret little code or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
little do they know I do it to both of them, but they both just feel special. So I know that that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of has been in the past my way of even checking in. Like you said, I'm not always able to, but sometimes the
Right.
younger one would be doing something and I would be able to handle it, and I'd wink at my older one like, I got this, like I'm going to say some things that probably sound, I don't know, whatever. I can't even recall like a specific instant. I just know I would like, or we would spell, back when my
Yes.
younger couldn't
Yes.
spell.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask you. I always wrap up with three questions. And the first question is, what brings you joy?
So I think beauty brings me the most joy, and I find kind of beauty in everyday little things. I think that's also what like restores my soul the most. So if it's beauty in nature or even beauty in faces or relationships, beauty in art, poetry. I mean, like there's so many little things. I mean, like the pattern on this blanket is beautiful. I mean, like the smallest things really bring me joy. So beauty, it restores my soul, and it brings me joy.
Ooh, I like that answer. I haven't heard that one yet. That's pretty neat.
I mean, coffee also brings me naps. I mean,
Right.
those also my husband, of course, right?
um, if you could say one thing to your younger self when you first started this journey, what would it be?
I probably would say something like, "This is hard, huh?" And like give myself some empathy.
Mm.
I think we're all doing the best we can. I think my parents were doing the best that they could. I was doing the best that I could at the time with what I had. But I give myself some empathy and grieve for the things that I lost. Like, because when you do grieve, like emotion has to have motion. And so you can like move through it and experience the joy of adoption more fully. That's how I
What
give
do you
myself
mean emotion has to have motion?
motion. I like you can't just like sit like emotion is just like kept inside, not shared, or like it's just kind of stagnant or suppressed. Like it's just like it doesn't have any room to go anywhere.
Mm.
You just get
Right.
stuck.
Yeah.
So emotion like has to have motion for it to really be seen and heard and comforted, healed. Yeah.
I have to write that down. Emotion has to have motion. Is that another
Yeah.
one of your 1, 2, 3? You could coin that one.
You should.
I totally get the point, but I love the way you
Yeah.
phrased it. Emotion has to have motion. Um, okay, so then the next one is, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
What foster or adoption myth would you like to just blow up right now?
Yeah, I think there's a belief among foster and adoptive families that after a few years of like adjusting and finding a new normal, like you don't need support anymore. I
Mm.
think especially for families who've like been fostering for decades or have adopted kids, but it's been a long time, long time since they came home. And I actually think that like once you've settled in and there is that felt safety and connection, that is when as a family, you can really work through some of the trauma of adoption.
Yeah.
And I mean, I recommend doing this with a trained professional, of course. I'm a little biased, but really to help you process the individual and the collective experience of adoption. And you can really, comfort any of those unaddressed injuries, and you can work on your family. But you can't do that right in the beginning when you're in crisis. And then when you finally kind of adjusted, people kind of go stagnant. We're like, wait, there was a lot that happened here that we never really actually worked through. We just kind of got over it, kind of got through it,
Right.
through it. So I don't think that, like, I think you need support for a long time and continue to get it, even when you feel like, I've got this. There actually might be a lot there that needs some comfort.
Yeah, I love that insight. In our support groups, we do a lot of training in them. They're not just talking, but we try to equip people with trust-based relational intervention tools.
Yeah.
And I love that you say that. Like, yeah, I mean, when you're in the crisis, it's hard for you to even process these tools. You're just like maybe grasping at one or two. You're just trying to get through. But I love how you say that. Yeah. Like later when the dust kind of settles a little bit, hopefully it settles enough,
Right.
that then you can do exactly what you're saying. You still need that support. You still need to then work through everything that you just went through.
Yeah.
It's like that post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Exactly. It really is. It truly is.
Yeah. And then one more thing you were just saying that I wanted to touch on. Oh gosh, but I lost it.
Okay.
I was like, oh, there's something else I need to bring up. But
If it comes to you, let me know.
all right. So the need for long-term support. Yeah, I think that that's a good one. So I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Is there anything else that you have thought of? It could be, off of our little questions or whatever that maybe like we haven't addressed yet or anything.
I mean, I just want you all to know that I'm your biggest cheerleaders, and I'm so glad that you have Tristan and Max here to give you lots of great support, because we don't want to go it alone. And this is a really unique thing that not everyone gets, and especially when you're in the trenches, you really need that good support. So I believe in you. I think you're doing important and life-changing work. I think you're, making an impact on eternity, and so I respect you and I empathize with you, and I'm cheering you on because you are making a difference in the life of a child.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So before you go, I just want to make a few announcements. Our next upcoming conversations. So next week, we're going to have Jason Weber, the National Director of Foster Care from Christian Alliance for Orphans. He'll be talking to us about getting help from the community. I just remembered the question I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
I feel like newsflash. So you talked about, you had just said, your bias was getting help from a professional, which I appreciate. But there's so many different professionals out there.
Yeah.
How do we know what to look for? Like there's psychologists, there's psychiatrists, there's counselors, there's marriage family.
Right.
If we're just now looking to try to figure that out, what do you suggest people are looking for? There's neurologists, there's so many things.
Right.
It's so confusing.
I think it does depend on your unique needs. Like, I mean, I would say, like, for example, a neurologist is a very specific specialty. If there was like some type of pre-existing condition that you were concerned about for a child, maybe that'd be a reason, but as far, and I have great respect for LPCs, licensed professional counselors, MFTs, marriage and family therapists, psychologists. There's even social workers that are clinical social workers. Great respect for the variety of different levels of training within the field of psychology. I would focus maybe less on the degree, though I think it's important. I mean, I got my doctorate, so I thought it was important, but really focus on the training and what experience the person has, or how much do they understand trauma, how much do they understand attachment. Because I think especially in the world of child mental health, there's a lot of behavioral approaches where it can be pretty punitive, and there's it's really rigid, and that kind of goes, it's conflicting with trust-based relational interventions. So I would really look to see if your worldview aligns with the therapist, and should they get trauma and attachment? Would they be cheering you on in your in your journey towards becoming a secure safe haven for your child, and focusing less on the behaviors and more on the attachment. So I think it's actually really comes down to experience and like the worldview of the therapist, and you can ask them and you can let them know, hey, this is my child's background. I'm looking for someone who is trauma informed and attachment based. They'll be very impressed that you use that language, and see if it's a match that way.
So is that the best like buzzwords we can use to try to narrow down what we want? Is we want trauma informed and attachment based?
I think so. That's kind of the language that's used.
And if they say they're behavioral, whatever.
It's not all bad. I mean, I use behavioral interventions at a teaspoon at a time because they are effective and there's research to back it. And with children who have been traumatized, we know that it's not even about the behavior. You know, there's so much more that's happening underneath. And so until you meet that need that's driving the behavior, you might have a really obedient child at the end of working with a therapist that's only focused on behaviors, but you're not going to have a child that's connected or feels safe. So I'm much more interested in having parents and children connect and attach securely than I am about changing a child's behavior. And if I'm even being more honest, I think as a parent, you should know going into therapy with your child, I'm actually more interested in changing the parent's behavior than I'm interested in changing the child, because I believe if you change the parent's parenting strategies, the child will change as well. So that's at least where I'm coming from. So
yes, I can say amen to that. Yeah. So that's okay. Great. Trauma informed, attachment based. Yeah. Be prepared to change yourself before your kid. I always think, you know, we got to do the hard work. We can't just expect our kids to do the hard work without us modeling it and then having empathy for them, for how hard it is for us to change. Like if we're having a hard time not exploding and all of that, and not using mindful tools on ourselves, like you know, you got that. Okay, that's a whole nother show. We're going down.
Talk about that. Yeah. Another conversation.
Thank you for letting me come back to that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right. So then Jason's going to talk to us about getting help from the community. He's also a foster adopt parent. And then on the 23rd, we're going to have Kay and Mylan Yorkovich. They're the authors of How We Love, and they specialize in attachment. And they're going to talk to us about trauma and attachment and how to heal as a family. If you just don't have their book, How We Love, yet, I suggest you get it before you watch this. And also, I just wanted to let people know too that after those two conversations, that those are going to be my last Replenish conversations for now. Now that summer's hit, I'm going to spend time with my family and just have some fun connecting. So anyways, if you would like to stick around for the after party, I'm on from 5:30 to 6. We're going to say goodbye to Rachel, but I thank all of you who called in this week to Replenish, and I pray you, that all of you who are struggling during this time, that you feel replenished and have received some hope to sustain you. Don't forget to join us in our private Facebook group, Safe, Precious, and Heard. And as Rachel's mom always says, remember there's no such thing as a perfect parent, only a growing parent. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us for a Replenish conversation. We appreciate your time and really value your contribution to the community.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy.
Awesome.
Have a great night.
All right. Thank you.
Blessings.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody, feel free to stick around if you'd like to join the after party.